Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Dr. Jaquiba Henderson, the Senior Vice President for Maternal Child Health Impact and the Interim Chief Medical and Health Officer here at March of Dimes. Today, I'm filling in for our usual host, our CEO and President, Stacey Stewart, and I'm so happy to be here with you today. September is Neonatal Intensive Care Awareness Month, and this week is Neonatal Nurses Week. So in this episode of Healthy Moms, Strong Babies, and part of our webinar series, we're celebrating NICU families and healthcare workers. Often when we talk about the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, or the NICU as most people call it, it's in the context of caring for premature births. But there are actually many additional reasons why a family might rely on a NICU for their newborn, and we'll discuss some of those reasons today. We also celebrate some of the most amazing people and organizations working to making having a baby in the NICU easier and more inclusive for all families. We've assembled a wonderful panel of NICU professionals and NICU parents who are going to share their expertise and experiences with us here today. So with that, let's meet our esteemed panelists. Our first panelist is Dr. James Cook, who is a neonatologist and the Director of Newborn Services at Geisinger Medical Center in Danville, Pennsylvania. Dr. Cook graduated from Jefferson Medical College of Thomas Jefferson University in 1984 and went on to specialize in neonatal perinatal medicine and pediatrics. He has more than 35 years of experience in caring for premature infants, newborns at high-risk deliveries, and those born with congenital anomalies. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Cook.
Thanks, Dr. Henderson. It's a pleasure to be here.
Our next panelist is Ashley Gilden Spitzer, who is an IVF, NICU, and surrogacy mom of 2, as well as the founder of the Facebook group, Fertility Friends of Friends. Ashley has started a community where others can provide hope, stories, and advice to those who are struggling and going through all of these issues simultaneously, where women can lean on each other and find friendship and guidance through these difficult times. In addition to her passion for all things dealing with fertility and surrogacy, her daughter was born at 33 weeks gestation and spent 47 days in the NICU. It was during this period that Ashley learned the importance of being able to speak to other NICU parents, precisely why she's here today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ashley.
Thank you for having me.
And next we have Jaylee Hilliard, a Senior Director of Clinical Strategy at Angel Eye Health, where she's an innovator in the NICU space. She's also a nurse and a NICU mom, so she can offer her perspective from both sides of the NICU as a medical professional and also as a NICU parent. Thank you so much for being a part of today's discussion, Jaylee, and happy Neonatal Nurses Week to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys today.
And our next panelist, we are so pleased to welcome Janae Johns, who's the president of Once Upon a Preemie Incorporated, which is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to pioneer health and racial equity education, advocacy, and family empowerment solutions for perinatal and neonatal healthcare professionals by centering the lived experiences of Black preemie families. Janae is also the mother of a micropreemie and authored the book, Once Upon a Preemie, to empower NICU families. Janae also held health equity leadership roles for the nation's largest Medicaid and commercial insurance companies. We're so honored to have you here with us today, Janae.
Thank you, Dr. Henderson. I'm honored to be here.
And last but surely not least, we're so thrilled to welcome Therese Rizante, a March of Dimes NICU Family Support Program Coordinator at Cleveland Clinic Children's Hillcrest Hospital. Teresa has been in her role providing education, information, and support to NICU families and staff for more than 10 years. She's organized and implemented NICU family meetings for parent-to-parent support, NICU reunions, special projects like NICU readathons, Kangaroo Care Week, and Nurse Appreciation Week. Most recently, she partnered with caregivers throughout her organization to support a hugely successful community baby shower. The baby shower provided supplies for parents in need and parent education focused on maternal health, safe sleep, and breastfeeding. Thank you for joining us, Therese.
Thank you so much for having me today.
So now that we've met all of our panelists today, let's get started. And I'd like to remind those who are joining us today that you can use the Facebook comments section to send us your questions. And we'll also do our best to address all of the questions that we receive. We also will be providing resources to you via links in the comments section and also at the end of today's webinar. Thank you all for joining us today. So let's start our discussion today with Dr. Cook, Dr. James Cook. At the introduction of this webinar, we pointed out that while we associate the NICU with the treatment of premature births, that is not the only care that NICUs provide. Can you enlighten us on some of the other reasons why new parents might need NICU services?
Thanks, Dr. Henderson. Sure. NICU care actually can start right in the delivery room. So I think one of the things to remember is that in many hospitals with NICUs, it's the NICU personnel, the doctors, nurse practitioners, and nurses that might go to those deliveries that they think may need some special help. So that's one thing to remember, especially if it's in the evening hours or overnight, things like that. And then the other thing to remember is most of our NICU admissions actually are not preemies. Most of the babies that are admitted to the NICU actually are term because there's so many more term deliveries than there are preemie deliveries. Reasons that babies may need to come to the NICU can be hugely varied. So it may be just a baby's having difficulty transitioning. Maybe the baby's breathing fast after the delivery and needs some additional monitoring. And then it transitions, they can go back to mom and dad in their room. Or it may be that the baby may have a more significant problem. Maybe there's a surgical problem, or maybe there's a feeding problem in the nursery, or maybe the baby's got some low sugars in the nursery and needed to come over for some IV fluids. Things like that. That can happen in term babies. And we see that not uncommonly. So if you look around any NICU, you're going to see a lot of preemies because the preemies stay a really long time. But when you look at the numbers of admissions in NICUs, most of the admissions actually are term babies.
Wow, since so many babies get admitted to the NICU for reasons other than being premature, it seems like NICU admissions are more common than we may have thought. So how would you say, how common are NICU admissions since term babies are also impacted and need that care?
Well, if you look at a term population, about 10% of term babies need some additional help at delivery. So, there's a lot of term deliveries. So maybe 10%, maybe a bit less of those term babies need to come to the NICU. And then you get to the late preterm babies, those babies born at 34, 35, 36 weeks. I'm defining term as over 37 weeks. Mm-hmm. So the 34, 35 weekers, most of those babies are going to wind up coming to the NICU. Usually they need NICU help because they can't maintain their temperature, they can't stay warm, or they can't maintain their blood sugar and they need an IV. Or they can't feed well enough on their own and they need some additional feeds with an NG tube or something like that. What I usually tell our parents here is that if the baby is born around 34 weeks, you're pretty much guaranteed the baby's coming to the NICU for one of those problems. If a baby is born at 35 weeks, it's kind of a 50-50 proposition. It just depends on how the baby's doing. And once you hit 36 weeks with your baby, then most of those babies actually can stay with mom and dad in the labor and delivery suite. So
wow, that's amazing. It seems like there's a wide range of services available depending on the severity and type of the condition requiring admission in the NICU. And as you've illustrated that the circumstances why someone comes to the NICU differs with every family. So I'm wondering, what are some of the commonalities? So we know there are differences based on the conditions. What are some of the commonalities that a family can expect if their baby is admitted to the NICU?
Well, I think one of the things I would experience would be a loss of control, right? A baby is admitted to the NICU, it's admitted to an ice sled or a warmer, there's an IV put in, these things are happening before your eyes. Even though the admission, parents can visit 24/7 in most NICUs these days, the decisions about what to do with the baby, primarily are being made by the medical team, the nursing staff, et cetera, and it's not left to the family to do that. So, we always encourage families to be part of that decision making, attending on rounds, communicating with your team, et cetera, so that you can have your input, because we also like to believe that parents know their baby's best. And so we value that input, on successive days the baby's in the NICU. So I think one of the things is it's really technical. Everybody's on a monitor. Everybody basically has an IV or some sort of tube. And some NICUs have private rooms, which makes things a lot more quiet and a lot less distracting, and other NICUs don't. Other NICUs have very large rooms with many babies in a room, and it can be very noisy and overwhelming and not a lot of privacy. I think the primary thing is the technology and the lack of control of what's going to happen with your baby, to an extent.
Yeah, I just have to say, I marvel at just the advances that have been made in the technology and how well you all are able to care for these tiny babies that are so fragile. And I know times that I've been in the NICU visiting, just thinking of the size and imagining inserting an IV on a baby that small. I mean, that's an amazing skill. And I just want to commend you for the high level of high technologic and highly skilled care that you all offer in a NICU. But I know that this is really scary for families that, they come in and see their baby hooked up to different machines and tubes. And so what kind of support can families expect from hospital staff? And what are some key things that parents need to know before beginning a NICU journey?
Well, I think it's to be prepared. It can be a rocky road. So sometimes the baby can have a very good day, and the next day may not be such a good day. And so I think they need to prepare for those ups and downs. They need to be prepared for a prolonged length of stay. So the earlier the baby is born, the longer the baby stays in the NICU. So if the baby's born around 30, 32 weeks, one would expect a 4 to 6 week, maybe longer length of stay in the NICU, depending. But regardless of all of that, I think a primary resource for families actually should be the bedside nurse, to introduce the family to what's going on here, explain what all this stuff is, explain why we're doing it, and explain how it's going to benefit the baby, and how it may change over time. So that's one big resource. And then the other resource I found in our nursery is with the benefit of our family support specialist. Families meeting families, and families having common activities, having conversations, discussing their stressors and what they're finding with their baby. And I think that mutual support in a NICU environment, especially for families who are staying a long period of time, and I consider a long period of time weeks. I think other families may consider a long period of time 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to have that mutual support in your NICU, whether it's guided by a family support specialist, a social worker, something like that, to meet other families.
Yes, thank you. I know we're very proud of the March of Dimes NICU Family Support Program. We just celebrated 20 years last year, and I'm just so glad that there are supports available for families to get through such a stressful time.
Yes, so are we.
And so, building on Dr. Cook's insights, I'd like to turn to our next guest, Ashley Gilden Spitzer, who has experienced firsthand as a mother with a wealth of experience, both as a NICU parent, but also with experiences with other trying experiences during pregnancy, such as in vitro fertilization and surrogacy. So Ashley, you had 2 babies in 2021, born just 4 months apart.
Yes.
Can you please share your story with us?
Yeah, I first want to just thank Dr. Cook, because after being a NICU mom, I have the utmost respect for NICU doctors and nurses. They are some of the most kind and amazing individuals. So I just thank you for everything that you do. So I had 2 babies last year in 2021. My daughter Isabel arrived in July. I carried her. She arrived at 33 weeks and 3 days. And my son Xander arrived in November via gestational carrier surrogacy. This was a very long and trying 3+ year journey to get pregnant. Just to take it back a step. my husband and I were early diagnosed with unexplained infertility after multiple rounds of failed IVF, implantation failure, miscarriages, ectopic pregnancies, multiple surgeries for endometriosis, laparoscopy, etc. And we decided to finally turn to surrogacy. Fortunately, making genetically normal embryos was not our issue, and we had an arsenal of embryos waiting for us, but we just needed a proper, uterus person to carry our baby. And at the time I live in New York City, surrogacy was not legal in New York, so it was a little bit trickier on that matter. And we used an agency to find a surrogate in a state that was legal across the country. And we fortunately, right before COVID, had matched with a surrogate in Minneapolis. COVID happened and kind of derailed everything in our timeline, but we were able to transfer to her. She got pregnant, but unfortunately she miscarried a few weeks later. We transferred to our surrogate again. She got pregnant again, and unfortunately she miscarried again. So we had lost 4 embryos to our first surrogate, and basically started looking for a new carrier. But at the same time, I decided I was going to give myself one more try. I didn't feel like my own pregnancy journey was over yet, but I couldn't, it was a very physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausting journey. It had taken a lot on my health in all aspects. And I decided to give myself one last shot. And I transferred my 6th transfer to me in December of 2020. And the stars finally aligned and I got pregnant. I was very nervous about my ability to carry, given my history. And we had actually just found a second surrogate. And so we decided to still move forward with her, transferred to her a few weeks later. She got pregnant. And so we were both due 12 weeks apart. We found out that I was carrying a girl and she was carrying a boy. And we were just over the moon.
Wow.
Yeah.
What an amazing story. First of all, I just want to say I'm so sorry for all the losses that you experienced,
Thank
but
you.
what an amazing outcome.
Yes.
Wow. But even with that, I know it was tough because I understand your daughter Isabel was born premature at 33 weeks.
So being an IVF pregnancy and just everything I was going through, I was on a ton of immune meds to support my pregnancy. And I had like a few, I was carrying very small. My daughter was constantly trending in the, 15th to 20th percentile. So I had, fortunately, which is my number one advice to anyone going through pregnancy, is to really find doctors that will support you and who will help advocate for you, will understand your anxiety. And my doctor was extremely supportive in my OB, and she fortunately had scheduled weekly non-stress tests and STs starting at 34 weeks. I maybe had a sign or something just told me that week before that I was very anxious and I wanted to get in my scan early before the weekend. And I went at 33 weeks and 3 days to Weill Cornell in New York City for my first weekly routine non-stress test, shortly to find out that my daughter was indeed in distress. And they was sent immediately up to labor and delivery. I was given, I was on full, consistent, continuous monitoring. And I was given my first steroid shot at about 2 p.m. We had a scare at 4 p.m. I was about 5 seconds away from an emergency C-section. They called it off because those steroid shots, as most NICU moms know, are really essential to the development of the lungs. They really wanted to buy me as much time as possible. And then, of course, 2 more hours later, it happened again. And at 6:26, with only 4 hours of a steroid shot in, my daughter was born via emergency C-section. I actually had to get put under anesthesia because I had taken a blood thinner that morning. And fortunately, her name is Isabel. She was born 4 pounds, 3 ounces. She definitely had premature lungs. So early on, that was her main issue, was, respiratory distress syndrome, RDS. And she was on some sort of oxygen support for her first month in the NICU. And it's kind of like Dr. Cook said, a lot of being in the NICU it's just an emotional roller coaster. There's days where there's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I think the best thing is to just kind of focus only on your baby. Try not to compare to other babies who are in the NICU, because there were babies that were born earlier than my daughter who spent way less time. Isabel spent probably more time than your average 33-weeker in the NICU, because, you know, she was there for 47 days because of needing to be on an oscillator and a ventilator. And then also just, you know, being a feeder and a grower and just learning how to eat. There was one day where she was taking, you know, we were 2 days away from discharge, and then she decided she didn't want to eat anymore. And the tube went back in and we started all over. So, you know, as a NICU mom, I think the biggest question people ask is, oh, when is she coming home? And it's like, I will know when I know, you will know, because you don't know until you are literally walking out the door. When they unplugged her from the tubes, I cried, because then I was like, okay, she's not on a monitor, nothing can happen. I didn't tell any family or friends that we were out until we literally had stepped outside the hospital.
Wow. I can't even imagine. And I know that the compounded experience of, you know, the difficulties getting pregnant and just the whole experience of what you went through, and then with your daughter, I'm sure that all of those experiences together have impacted you in a profound way. And I'd love to hear more about how it has informed your perspective and how you're supporting other families.
Yeah. So when I was going through, especially IVF and even just surrogacy, especially since it wasn't very common in New York, it was definitely very isolating. And I felt like nobody really spoke about what you were going through, and the hormones and injections and the toll it would take on your body. And I felt like there were a lot of these kind of generic IVF groups on Facebook, but they were, you know, countrywide, and I couldn't really relate to a lot of the people. And so I created my own community, Fertility Friends of Friends, a little less than a year ago, last October, just to kind of create a safe space for, you know, anyone from egg freezing to embryo and egg adoption, IVF, surrogacy, NICU moms, just where people, you know, can really see that there's a lot of other women and men who look just like us, who are going through, you know, the same experiences, and really to get that support and even meet for coffee or lunch. Or, you know, I found those NICU Facebook groups so supportive. I actually recently looked back, and I think I posted the same message on like 6 different groups in those first like 48 hours. I've never been more scared in my life than for the health of my daughter. There's nothing more scary than seeing your newborn baby tied up to all those tubes, and just, you know, hearing one positive story from another baby who was diagnosed with RDS and came home and was healthy and had no long-term issues. That's like, those are the things I needed to like wake up the next day and just, you know, feel positive. So I created this community. It has already, I think, almost 1,100 members. It's been really amazing, and just kind of my way to give back for all the experience and knowledge that I had while going through it.
Wow, that is fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing about all that you're doing and your lived experience. It's so important to have the perspective of people who've experienced this firsthand. And similarly, I'd like to turn to Jay Lee Hilliard. Now, I know your experience is similar in that you've experienced being a NICU parent, but also being a NICU nurse. I know that offers a whole different level of I don't know, worry, stress. Sometimes they say ignorance is bliss, but when you have the knowledge of what's happening, what's going on, can you tell us a little bit about what happened with you and your daughter?
Sure, absolutely. You know, I was having just a typical pregnancy. Everything seemed to be going well, minus having a lot of nausea throughout the entire pregnancy. And at 32 weeks, I went to a normal OB appointment, the first one that my husband didn't go with me to. They noticed that my blood pressure was high and did some further testing, and discovered that I was showing some signs of preeclampsia, kind of just out of nowhere. I had still been giving my husband a hard time about how I still had almost 2 months to pack a hospital bag. And then I would be begging at 40 weeks to, you know, get this baby out of here. And we didn't have our nursery set up. We hadn't had my baby shower. But we're assuming, you know, we're just going on that typical first time pregnancy journey, and really excited to have her. And then I remember walking into the hospital where they were going to monitor me for 24 hours. And I looked at my mom and I was like, I already have a feeling I'm not walking out of here without a baby. So I went in thinking I was there for 24 hours of monitoring that turned into, we're going to keep you here until 37 weeks, and monitor you and her and your blood pressure. And then that turned into getting steroids. Luckily, we were able to get both doses of steroids in. And I will tell you that I do believe that made a huge difference getting those steroids on board. And then less than 12 hours after the second dose of steroids, my blood pressure spiked. It wasn't responsive to medication. And I was going to have a similar situation as Ashley, where they said, if we deliver you right now, you'll have to be under general. We will try to give you a little more time if you really want to be awake and see if your blood pressure can hold. And I was like, yes, let's please try a little longer. Luckily, I held out a few more hours and was able to be there. It was a C-section. Everything happened really quickly. My husband remembers being woken up at, it was like 4 a.m. and he's waking up. There's all these people in the room and the OB comes in and was like, I think today is going to be a perfect day to have a birthday. What do you guys think? And we were like, what? So everything just happened really quickly after then. I've been a NICU nurse and the director of that NICU. We had amazing care. I knew they had an amazing team there, but I had not spent time as a patient. I had never had a baby before, and I had never really understood what was going on before babies got to the NICU. And there's so many pieces that happen behind the scenes. The NICU team was amazing. They came and introduced themselves and explained to my husband, your daughter's 32 weeks and 6 days. To me, I was not worried about her. I was like, she's had steroids. She should be a good weight. We're going to be fine. To my husband, he had no idea what to expect. So I really appreciated them speaking to us like first-time parents and not expecting that my background in the NICU would prevent me from needing all that information, because when it's your baby, everything changes and all that information, is just out the door. So we had Everly at 32 weeks and 6 days. She's about to be 18 months old next week. I don't even want to think about it. And it was definitely an interesting experience being pregnant and having her during the pandemic. That was really, really tough. My husband and I were the only ones there. After I was admitted, I knew that no other visitor would be able to be there if I had to be there for weeks and weeks. And that caused a lot of anxiety and concern for me while we were there. And also that continued throughout our NICU stay. But she had what I would consider a really typical 32-week stay. We were there for 25 days. She did a lot of working on feeding and growing, which was very frustrating, but it was also really rewarding to see her kind of persevere and grow and thrive.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, being on one side, but actually I sort of can imagine a little bit because I'm an obstetrician. So when I finally was on the side when I was the patient, I was literally reading the strips and calling the nurse saying, I'm having details. I can imagine you going into the NICU with your baby as a patient and having to be hands off was really hard. But I'm interested in hearing about how that experience impacted you professionally and sort of led you to where you are now.
Sure. I had somebody mention to me after I had her and said, you must have been the perfect NICU parent, having those years of experience and knowing behind the scenes everything that's going on. And all I could think about is there's not a perfect parent. No parent should have to experience the NICU. And I did feel for myself like maybe ignorance would have been bliss. I feel like my husband handled it very differently than I did. Obviously, I wanted to know a lot more about what was happening in rounds and what the plan of care was and her labs and things of that nature. I spent a lot of hours sitting at that bedside that I had been a nurse in, that I had been the director of. I had overseen operations and staff there. And I knew a lot of these people. I trusted them. They had been members of my team. But that did not make it any easier for me to sit there feeling so helpless for so many hours a day. But I spent a lot of time journaling and thinking through and observing my baby, the interactions of other babies and their families, the interactions of the care team with various families. And I really just prayed about it a lot. And I was like, I know that I'm in this position for a reason, and I'm going through this experience for a reason. And I really just tried to focus on absorbing everything I could around me and try to figure out how I'll be able to give back later after I can kind of synthesize and understand and process what happened. So I'll say after going through that, it really fueled this passion I already had for lactation and breastfeeding and family integrated care. And what did that mean? And I will tell you that after being kind of on the other side of the bed, I knew parents struggled leaving their child there and trusting members of the care team, but I had no idea how terrifying that was, and how heart-wrenching it was to leave your baby over and over and over and over again. And that's a very traumatic experience, even though I knew so many of the incredible people that were caring for her every day. So now in my role at Angel Eye Health, we are a family engagement company. I work a lot with the development of new products, interviewing families and users of the technology. And, this new and reignited passion I have for family integrated care is really helping as we innovate and think about the NICU of the future and how we can really support bringing families to the table and engaging them as that very most critical part of the care team. And I think that's a gap and something that we can do a lot better in NICUs across the country today. And there's a lot of really cool things on the horizon with technology that we can do to help really educate and empower families to serve as parents when that altered role of being a mom or being a parent is something that they're going through with the NICU.
Oh, that's fantastic. And with Angel Eye, parents can actually see their babies when they're not there, correct? And be engaged with the child care team.
We actually have 4 solutions. One of them is bedside cameras that allows the family and all of those support people also that really need to be there to support that mom, baby, family dyad. That is a critical component I cannot emphasize enough, especially with visitation restrictions and things of that nature. There's also a way to provide education for families and to send photo, video, and text messages from the care team. So when families aren't there for rounds, for example, you can keep those lines of communication open. And I will say that that's one of the biggest lessons I learned was keeping the lines of communication open with the care team is so important because every parent and every family is different. Their needs are different. They have different experiences. And when you open those lines of communication and really all work for that common goal of getting a baby home, as healthy and safely as possible, that's where the real magic happens. And then our last solution, Milk Tracker, also engages parents in that feeding process as well, which I think is another one of those roles that parents have an opportunity of really digging in and focusing on when there's so many things they can't control during that NICU experience.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's really wonderful. So now I'd like to turn to Janae Johns. You're the author of Once Upon a Preemie, and I understand you have had a micropreemie baby. And in addition to that, I forgot to mention you also are a master of public health and an advocate for families and premature children. Thank you so much for being with us. I'd love to hear more about your son, and if you could share with us, what it was like being the mom of such a small baby and how they were cared for, how he was cared for at birth.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'd like to start by just sharing what a micropreemie is, because I had no idea what a micropreemie was until I became the mother of a micropreemie. And a micropreemie is a baby who's born before 26 weeks of pregnancy. They have specialized medical needs and usually require a longer length of hospital stay. I like to think of micropreemies as the NICU's miracle babies, right? They're the tiny but mighty fighters who are determined to grow and feed and hopefully ultimately transition and graduate out of the NICU to go home one day. And again, I didn't learn about what a micropreemie was until that was our birth journey and experience, which was difficult on so many levels because I was at the time of my son's birth leading the health disparities portfolio for one of the nation's largest Medicaid managed care insurance companies, leading implicit bias training, working with hospitals and physicians and providers to make sure that care was culturally competent and equitable, and more importantly, to eliminate and reduce these types of disparities. And here we are becoming a part of that growing statistic in this country of premature and very small premature babies being born. At birth, my son was a 26-weeker. He weighed just over a pound and he was small enough to fit into the palms of our hands. And we experienced a long and turbulent 77-day journey through the NICU, which Dr. Cook and Ashley and Jaylee can attest to was nothing shy or short of an unexpected and turbulent roller coaster ride. Many twists, many turns, many unexpected things that happened to our son that were completely out of our control. And required us to learn patience and put our parent advocacy skills to the test to be his voice, and just to share our parent observations during the care of our son. Caring for a micropreemie as a parent, as I mentioned, requires a lot of patience because, as Dr. Cook alluded to already, you don't get a lot of firsts. Your baby's first feeding comes from a tube or maybe a Q-tip or a cotton ball, like my son's first feeding did. Your first diaper changes, temperature readings, baths, all happen by the bedside nurse. You're watching, a member of the care team handle all of the things that parents usually get to experience when they have a traditional or full-term birth. And that's very hard, mentally and emotionally. You just want to be an advocate and a partner in care if it's accepted by the clinical care team. I recall one of our positive experiences in the NICU where we were just spending so much time bedside with our son. And one of the first things that a nurse pointed out to me was that, Janae, you're here a lot. You're here when the NICU door is open. You're one of the last parents to leave. Why don't you get a library of books and start reading to your son? And I'm so thankful to this NICU nurse who recommended and suggested that I start reading to my son, because it gave me an opportunity to normalize a very abnormal experience. There wasn't much I could do. He was about 2 weeks before he was strong enough to come out of his isolate for us to do skin-to-skin care or kangaroo, which was very precious, felt amazing, but that took 2 weeks. And so reading to my son, whether he was in the isolate or hanging out with me during skin-to-skin care, was one of the most powerful experiences and one of the most memorable experiences that I took away from our NICU, and one that I encourage all preemie parents and NICU parents to do.
That is fantastic. And I understand that it was from this experience, I know that was very rewarding to read to him, but all of this sort of led to you becoming an author and writing the book Once Upon a Preemie. I'd love to hear more about that book.
Sure. Like Jaylee, about a week or so after my son was discharged from the NICU, we were finally home in silence. There were no NICU bells, no chimes, no parents, and hospital staff scrubbing in and scrubbing out. It was the first time in 3 months that I could sit in absolute and complete silence. And in that silence, I had an opportunity to process everything our family just experienced in the NICU, good, bad, and indifferent. And in that silence, I started to journal as my own healing journey. And as a part of my journaling, I wrote and dedicated a lot of poems to my son. And one of those poems started off with the title of You Are So Very Special, because that's how I viewed him when he was this small until now that he's 8 years old going on 38. But You Are So Very Special turned into Once Upon a Preemie, which was very important for me for a number of reasons. One, I was the preemie parent who the hospital staff hated to see come and loved to see go. I was full of questions. I was calling. I was not always the most pleasant parent to work with. I mean, it's a very traumatic and emotion-filled experience, and I wasn't expecting it, right? If all of your friends and family members are delivering full term and you're the outlier with, this very isolated and very emotion-filled experience, you're different. You're different as a parent, right? And so honestly, I just wanted an opportunity to give back to the NICU. I wanted this to be a way to say thank you, a way to apologize for some of my not so nice mommy ways. But more importantly, when we were reading books to our son, all of the lullabies that we've read, as fantastic as they were, did not speak to our unique role, not being able to tuck our babies in at night, not being able to kiss them and turn the lights off at home. That wasn't our reality for 3 months. And so Once Upon a Preemie, once we published it, became the Preemie and NICU parents' lullaby that spoke uniquely to our situation to motivate, empower, and encourage preemie parents that if their babies are going to be okay, you can do this. And so we are so thankful for the outpouring of support that we've received to get Once Upon a Preemie into the hands of NICUs and preemie parents and NICU parents across the country, pre, during, and post journey, because it is certainly unique and just a tool, just one tool that we use to help support parents in that very vulnerable and fragile space that they're in.
Wow, that is fantastic. What an amazing journey, and being able to use it to help others is just so wonderful. And I understand the organization Once Upon a Preemie is based on that book and supporting Black preemie families. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you tell us about how any upcoming opportunities where professionals and families can connect with the organization?
Absolutely. We are excited to announce and share that on November 17th, we're hosting our first in-person conference here in Philadelphia, Accelerating Health and Racial Equity for Black Maternal and Neonatal Equity, where we will be convening 75 healthcare professionals and preemie parent advocates to talk about solutions for addressing inequities in the Black maternal health crisis and what happens with families when they're in the NICU. We hope that if parents are interested in joining us, everything that we do is centered and rooted and grounded in lived experiences. We want to hear your stories. We want to hear what's working. We want to learn what's not working so that we can ensure and help the delivery of equitable care for Black birthing women and women whose babies land in the NICU like our family did.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, Therese Rosante, I just wanted to come to you. I know we've been hearing these wonderful and amazing stories from families and how it is so clear that support is needed for these families in the NICU. Can you please tell us about your role and what a March of Dimes NICU Family Support Coordinator does?
So thank you so much. And these moms, I would be right there walking beside you. It is an honor and a privilege always to walk beside our NICU families. Every single one, from a family that's in the NICU from 1 day to 156 days. That same stress, that same loss of control happens to every single one of our families. And with the March of Dimes Family Support Program, I'm there. I can offer staff education to families, and support to our families as well. We actually have NICU family support books that we give on behalf of the March of Dimes to our families. We have a short stay booklet, and then we have our NICU journey book. And it is a journey. This whole program that was developed over 20 years ago was a program where we can come into the NICU, support our families, as well as support the nurses, the physicians, the whole entire team. And that's what I feel like. I am an extension to the team. Not a nurse, not a social worker. I tell our families that right off the bat. I tell them that I am there for them to help them through this journey. Most of the time I'm there offering, celebrations for the milestones that the babies achieve, which we have to celebrate every single day.
Thank you so much. I mean, that is so wonderful. And it looks like we're almost out of time. I wish we had so much more time to celebrate the amazing work being done in NICUs and to celebrate the nurses and professionals and the families who have experienced the care in the NICU. But our time has come to an end. And this does it for our wonderful Healthy Moms, Strong Babies webinar about NICU families and healthcare workers. So once again, I'm so grateful to our panelists for sharing their experiences and their expertise and and for your insights on how we can continue to advocate and provide support for NICU families. We hope that we were able to answer many of your questions through listening to the stories from our families and caregivers today. March of Dimes has a variety of resources to help support families. And here is a slide with some of those resources. And we just want to thank you all so much for joining us. And we hope to see you for the next episode of Healthy Moms, Strong Babies. Thank you again for joining us today.